Greetings, Carson City. I'm Rob Beamer, host of Sierra Nevada Outdoors, and I have joined with Carson City community leaders, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and the University Nevada Cooperative Extension in a community-wide effort to examine the urban mule deer population present here and throughout Carson City. A community committee is being organized to examine the urban mule deer populations through the Carson City community to educate the Carson City public how to positively and legally manage deer in or around their property and or neighborhoods, be aware of the health and public safety risks with urban mule deer populations, and to help the Carson City public understand who they can call or reach out to when they experience issues related to urban mule deer throughout our community. I am joined today with Carson City Board of Supervisors member Karen Aboud, who represents District 1 in Carson City, and Sheriff Ken Furlong, who continues to serve as Carson City's 26th sheriff since first being elected in 2003. Welcome to you both. So let's start with you, Karen. Have you received any public comment or concerns from citizens in your district regarding the urban mule deer populations that we have here in Carson City?
Actually, I have. Last year, I received emails and phone calls with regards to an injured deer that was actually over on the east side of town. But this year, since I am in Ward 1 and the urban deer seem to congregate in that area, I'm in charge of them.
Because that butts right up to the Sierra foothills, right?
Yes, it does. And so I've gotten several emails contacting me with regards to the fact that the deer are consuming people's landscape, and also concern about children coming in contact with deer, which I have witnessed firsthand myself.
Okay, so do you feel like the mule deer populations have increased over the last 5 to 10 years?
Definitely. I've lived up in the Timberline area for the last 26 years. And prior to the waterfall fire, you would see, significant numbers, but nothing to the extent that they exist in that area now. Okay. The populations had subsided somewhat, post-fire, but, 3 years after that, you could see the herds significantly increase to the point where they are now.
Yeah, but they're coming back, right? Do you feel like they're increasing in numbers?
Yes.
I think that's been kind of the overwhelming, everybody has been talking about that they haven't seen numbers like this really ever since they've lived here in Carson City. So one thing I want to ask you is, do you feel like they're staying in town, these urban deer, or are they going back up to the foothills? I think a lot of people think that they're traveling, they're just coming into town for a quick meal, and then they go back up into the foothills. Is that true?
I think it depends on the area of town that you're in.
Okay.
I do know that there are a group of them, herds of them, that migrate from the Lakeview area through Timberline, down into town, Ash Canyon, Kings Canyon, and then you'll see them coming back, coming back up and following their trail back up into the hills. But then there are those that I know do exist and have found little places to sleep and live in town.
Yeah, they've taken up residency in a lot of different locations, right?
That's right.
Well, what about, let me ask you what your feeling is on urban mule deer presenting any kind of potential risk or safety hazard to the public. Is there any kind of public safety issues that we need to be concerned about?
Well, yes, there are. Ed Smith from Cooperative Extension shared a video with us, with the group that had met with regards to this. And this was with regards to mule deer in Utah and Montana area. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the mule deer in that video actually cornered a paper boy to the point where he had to hide under a car for well over an hour before he could be rescued, and pummeled a dog with their hoofs. Now, with that being said, here in town, I've seen, last year we did have one incident where there was a deer that had her little fawn in someone's backyard, and the dog was released out into the backyard, and the deer attacked the dog.
Yeah, which is a natural thing, right?
It's a natural thing. It's a protective instinct.
Exactly. Just like a human. If a human mother was to their child was at risk or whatever, right? We would see probably the same thing, right? Kenny, I'm sure you have had to run into that a time or two, right? But that's a natural thing. I think that the public needs to understand that, right?
They do, but what the public does need to understand as well, and especially kids need to understand, is that this is not Bambi. And I have seen, I saw two little girls attempting to feed a buck out of their hands right behind Fritch School.
That's a little scary, huh?
And my own grandkids who live in Reno and are not used to this urban deer population that we have, let them out of the car at my house, and they looked across the street to see a herd of 6 deer, and their immediate comment was, "Nini, are those real?" And I no sooner said yes, and they're racing up to the deer, and you have to go up and say, "Well, wait a minute, you have to understand these are wild animals."
Right.
And there's a further risk to animals in the sense that with the rodent population and the ticks and their life cycle, the deer can carry ticks, and they roll around on your lawn. Your dog goes out and rolls on the lawn, can pick up the ticks from there.
They bring it back in the house, right?
Right, exactly. So there's a health hazard with regards to that also.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Well, let's turn to you, Kenny. What are some of the? Well, let me ask you this: as an active sportsman and wildlife conservationist, I view myself as that. I understand that there's a need for wildlife management and certainly habitat management as well. And I know that you and I were born here in Carson City. We're lifelong Carson City residents, right? And I got to be honest with you. I think it's pretty cool that there are mule deer in town. I've never in my whole life I can't remember there's a time when mule deer were walking down Roop Street or in front of your office, and of all places, right? On Musser Street, there's a herd there that hang out around there, as well as where I work over at the Capitol. I saw some of the biggest mule deer bucks that I've ever seen hanging out there on the Capitol grounds. What's your thoughts there?
They're pretty easily spotted in the downtown corridor. They do use the crosswalks.
Yeah, better than the residents, or
much better than a lot of folks. But when it comes to wildlife and nature, it's one of the most beautiful creatures to have in our Western Nevada environment. They're beautiful, and I think that attraction brings on that emotional connection that I can feed them, that I can do something with them, but they are still wildlife. And what we're seeing over this, as Karen said, some period of time, I think we've seen an urban development. In other words, deer who have been born and actually raised right here inside of Carson City.
Right. So they haven't even seen the mountains or anything, right?
It's not a matter of them going back up into the mountains. They've never been there.
Yeah.
Generations after generation. And I kind of agree with some of the philosophies that you can mark on the calendar the wildfire or waterfall fire as a point when things began to change a little bit. A lot of the population, the wildlife population, began coming into town. And we knew that, and we were dealing with it. But over the course, they have turned into urban deer.
Yeah, and so they've taken up residency here, right? This is all they know, right?
This is all they know.
Yeah.
And so to move them, and we do often, especially with bears, we'll just kind of move them along, shuffle them along back into the wild. With the deer, you don't do that. You cannot do that. In fact, they're so mobile and agile, they're over fences, and there's no way we can even see on the other side.
Plus, it's a little bit more difficult to allow them to be able to adjust to that wild setting, right? I mean, if they've been born and raised here and they've never been in the wild.
Well, and that's back to the challenge that Karen was speaking about. People are in some cases feeding the deer,
which we know is illegal, right? We're going to expand on that a little bit.
People are caring for the deer, and so you really, I question, you may be jeopardizing that deer's life,
right?
If he were to return to the wild.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. What are some of the reports that the Carson City Sheriff's Department or Carson City Sheriff's Office or your dispatchers have received from the public regarding urban mule deer here in Carson City?
You know, when it comes to reports of problems with deer here in Carson, I think a lot of it is directed away from the sheriff's office when it comes into property damage. The deer is eating up all of my everything in my yard. What we get entangled with a lot is too heavy use of the crosswalk. You get into these rush hours and there's a lot of deer in that central corridor of Carson, and they're interfering with traffic. And unfortunately, periodically, and as Karen said, even in the outer skirts of Carson, deer getting hit by cars.
Yeah.
And when they get hit, they're not dead. They're because most of our traffic is limited in speed,
right.
And so they get severely injured, and that's where the call comes in.
Yeah, big difference between a deer getting hit on city streets, right?
Yes.
Versus on the bypass
Yes.
or on the highway, right?
Big difference.
Big difference, right? So there are, I mean, I know that the occurrences are pretty rare for you to where the sheriff's department unfortunately would have to dispatch or put down a deer. You know, none of us want to see that, right? But
Right.
we have to kind of take into consideration what's the best thing for the wildlife, what's the best thing for public safety, right?
Right.
And I know you guys do a great job at that, and I know that your dispatch center does a great job at
And I
kind of
appreciate
coordinating that.
and I appreciate that. But when it comes to the folks that live in these areas, you're danged if you do. And notice I said danged. You're danged if you do, and danged if you don't.
I get it.
They're beautiful creatures. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
And people emotionally attach themselves to them. They see that same fawn every day as it grows up into a beautiful big buck or such, and they've adopted them.
Right. They
And
look
there's
at it
an
as their
emotional-
wildlife, right?
It's an emotional attachment, and then when something happens, we very often become the bad guy.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate, and I hope that, you know, that anybody with the right frame of mind would understand that, you know, you're just acting in the wildlife's best interest, and certainly public safety's best interest as well. Okay, so what part does the Carson City Sheriff's Office play in the management of urban wildlife, particularly mule deer here in Carson City? Where do you guys fit in there? I mean,
Well, we're kind of a conduit to the Department of Wildlife. Calls will come into the center, and if we can divert those calls over to the wildlife folks, then that's the best approach. Obviously, they're not 24-hour staffed such as us, and we're right here.
yeah, and the resources are definitely limited with
yes.
Endell's law enforcement.
So if we can mitigate the problem with our own resources here in Carson, we will make that effort. And very often that's moving them along or getting them across the crosswalk,
Yeah.
playing the whole, or having to put a deer down. We don't choose to do that, but it's becoming a growing role that is being forced upon us.
Yeah, and your deputies are prepared for that should it ever have to
they,
happen.
They
right?
are prepared for it, but I don't think it's it's not a call. When that call comes in, you hope it went to the other patrol.
That's right. I get it. I totally get it. It's a tough situation for anybody to be in.
For all of it. How do you control which way a deer is going to walk?
Right.
If I'm trying to protect him from the traffic, especially at the rush hour time.
Yeah, totally.
And then, of course, you know, how do I get that deer that's gravely injured into a location where I can put it down and not have the kids over at the house area see it.
Right.
And I'm telling you, there's just no right way.
Yeah. I get it. But I think the biggest thing that we need the public to understand is that, number one, it's something that nobody wants to deal with, right?
That's true.
I mean, they don't want to ever have to be put in that situation. But when it becomes a threat to public safety, you as a kind of the governing authority to protect public safety in our community, you have that duty to make that happen, right?
And Karen brought it up very, very good. There are an enormous amount of examples where deer have turned on people.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
It may be the fawn, it may be something else, but they've turned on people. Now, certainly in all of those cases, we are going to come to protect those people from that wildlife. But I think our intent here is to educate the community on how they can be a part of preventing that from happening.
Right.
Watching out for those signals, those signs that deer may become aggressive, and staying back. Yes, they're beautiful, and yes, you want to take care of them and all this stuff, good stuff,
Yeah.
but deer will do some huge damage to your property, to yourself.
Yeah, they can injure you or potentially kill you.
They can be the most vicious animal you have
Yeah.
ever seen.
Yeah, and certainly to a young child, right?
Yes.
We never want to see that happen. And so, man, parents need to, or guardians or whatever, adults need to, if they ever see that, try and the best they can deter youngsters from
They need to
wanting to go out.
control their emotions.
Yeah, totally.
Yes,
I get it.
exactly.
I get it. Let's talk about feeding wildlife. I know a lot of people don't even realize that feeding wildlife is against the law. We are not. I mean, there's an NRS statute that
Yes.
actually states that it's unlawful to attempt to feed wildlife.
Yes, and if we receive reports of that, that's where we're going to funnel those over to the wildlife folks.
Right.
You can be cited and brought before a magistrate just for, again, feeling too good about that little
That's
deer
right, yeah.
walking in front of your house, or encouraging it to on
Yeah.
a daily basis by putting food out that's favorable to the deer, and you're encouraging them to come back. That may not be the way your neighbors feel about it.
Right.
Well,
And understanding that, right?
in the interest of the animal, there have been dead deer with full stomachs because they can't digest what they're being fed.
Yeah, they're not used to that.
That's
not
right.
Their digestive systems aren't used to a lot of that stuff.
That's
I
right.
get a kick sometimes out of some of the big box stores, that we have right here in our own backyard, right? During the springtime, they have these huge aisles full of all these deer protein pellets and different types of products that are used for baiting deer, and it's so illegal in the state of Nevada. I mean, we have a zero tolerance for that in the state of Nevada, and for that reason, right? That mule deer aren't capable of digesting a lot of that stuff, and so it's really important for the public to understand that, to make sure that they stay as far away as possible from deer when they see them. View them from a distance. I think that's appropriate, right? And anytime there's a threat of public safety, best thing to do is just get to a safe area, right?
Yes, get away
Them
from
and their
that.
family.
Yes. And a lot of that, and Karen put it very, very well. A lot of this is dependent on where you're at in this community.
That's right.
Right.
We see, it's beautiful to see a deer up on his hind legs eating from a fruit tree.
Yeah.
Okay. And I understand that, but that's more often seen on the west side near
Yes.
the mountainous areas.
Yes.
Down in that urban environment, a lot of the cases they're just being fed by folks.
Yeah.
So let's recap this a little bit real quick. So who should citizens contact if they have, if they want to get information on how to do how to deter, let's say, deer or other urban wildlife from damaging their landscape or their personal property or anything like that? What would be the best agency to contact for that?
Well, in terms of Cooperative Extension has a list of plant material, and Joanne Skelly has published it in the appeal on
Right.
occasion, but it has a list of plant material that is deer resistant. Now, that doesn't mean they won't eat it, but it won't be their first choice.
That's right.
And so that would be a good resource for people to tap if they want to know what will help, what the deer may not eat, what
Okay.
might salvage their landscaping efforts.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's local businesses and stuff here, right here in Carson City. I know Dave Ruff over at
Yes,
Greenhouse
Dave
Garden
is
Center
great
is great
about
about
that.
giving people instruction, helping them understand how to deter deer from certain parts of their landscape, right?
And the plant material is actually labeled. It will say deer resistant on it, and he's got a lot of that at his
Yeah.
shop.
I realize that.
And the second option is to take the time, when it's convenient for the people that live here, go on to the Department of Wildlife's website and educate yourself, not only about the deer, but the other wildlife that come into our community and we deal with every day.
Yeah.
The Department of Wildlife gives every opportunity to reach out into town, educate folks, and have us coexist, if you will,
You bet.
in a better manner.
Yeah, you bet. And I know a lot of the law enforcement officers for Department of Wildlife, and man, I don't know of one that would not take the time to visit with individuals if they had a problem and say, hey, maybe you should try these things, right?
That's exactly
Yeah,
true.
I mean, they're typically great resources. They're not out to just.
And typically they put on presentations that are put out in the press, and it will cover all of the different wildlife, the lions and the bears.
Right.
And so you get a little bit more education than just the one thing, the deer.
I like that. I like that. So another recap. Let's just if I think we decided that if citizens see a deer get hit by a vehicle, motor vehicle, here in city streets or within city limits, Carson City Sheriff's Department dispatch would be who they would contact, right?
Yes.
If one gets hit, they see one get hit, or they see a dead deer on that has been hit on the highways or byways, then it would be
Still contact us, and we can route that call to the right folks to get
Okay.
the deer removed from the area.
perfect. So let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's talk about this group, this community volunteer committee that we have created here in Carson City. I'm going to kind of refer to you on that a little bit, Karen, because you and I are both kind of involved in that, right?
Right,
And so, tell us a little bit about this new group. What is it all about?
Well, the point of organizing this group is to get the education out so that people understand how to interact with the deer that we live with.
Yeah.
And
Because they're not going away, right?
no, they're not
It is
going
what
away.
it is, right?
And you know, it's one of the beauties of living here.
It is. It
It's
is.
wonderful.
You could never probably get this down in like Las Vegas or in
No.
areas of Las Vegas, right?
No.
No, but
Although
that
the
would be a
bighorn
great
sheep, right?
picture.
That's right. Although the bighorn sheep was probably a more conducive of Las Vegas, but you're right?
So yeah, so the group is formed, and Joanne Skelly, I believe, had her first meeting with them yesterday.
With the volunteers,
With
right?
the volunteers to discuss ways of managing deer.
Okay.
And to discuss ways of getting the word out, especially to school-age kids.
Right.
And then to our adult population, whether it be, you know, at a special community meeting or in conjunction with another meeting that's
Yeah.
going on in town, such that we can get the word out.
Yeah.
So that's primarily the reason for the volunteers. And some of the volunteers were some of the people that expressed concern via email to me originally. So
How great is that, right?
It's
That
wonderful.
where we
It's
have
like,
the
let's
community
get you
getting
involved.
involved, right?
Yes,
And that's the
yes.
key thing. You know, we get to reap the benefit of seeing all this beautiful wildlife in our communities, but you know, we could give back by getting involved in that, right? I
right.
appreciate that. That's awesome. Who's coordinating the campaign?
right now, Joanne Skelly is coordinating that campaign through
And with-
Cooperative Extension.
And through the advisory board, right?
And
the Wildlife
through the
Advisory Board?
Citizens Committee Advisory
Okay.
Board on Wildlife, yes.
And when was their first meeting?
The first meeting with the volunteers was yesterday.
Oh, okay. So on the 20th, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So I'm sure they're going to have more meetings, and if people are interested in getting involved in that, they should probably reach out to the Cooperative Extension. Is that correct?
They could reach out to the Cooperative Extension. They could also reach out to Doug Martin and or Gil Yannick from the Citizens Committee, Advisory Committee on Wildlife, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And they'll put them in touch with the proper agency.
That's great. And so who should, are there any other meetings that are scheduled that you know of?
I'm not aware of the schedule with regards to that.
Okay, so we'll if anybody's interested, they could just get in touch with either the Cooperative Extension or reach out to the CAB board, they call the CAB, the
Yes.
Carson Wildlife Advisory Board, right? And they can go ahead and turn them on to
That's right.
where they need to go. Listen, I want to thank both of you guys for joining me here today.
Pleasure.
And it's
Thank you
appreciate
so
always a
much.
pleasure having you. I want you to know that from me as a citizen of Carson City, as well as I'm sure countless others, we sure appreciate you and appreciate the job that you guys do. And until next time, we'll see you in the outdoors.